1/3 of the U.S. Senate up for grabs. One seat from Georgia. 5 candidates are running for the Democratic nomination and the chance to challenge incumbent Senator Saxby Chambliss. From the Iraq War to Georgia's water crisis, the contenders state their case. Live from the Fox 5 studios in Atlanta, here's our moderator, Amanda Davis.
And good evening and welcome to Fox 5's Democratic U.S. Senate debate. Tonight, we're joined by all 5 candidates vying for a chance to face Republican incumbent Senator Saxby Chambliss in November, as well as the Libertarian candidate Alan Buckley. A new Rasmussen Reports poll shows whichever Democrat wins the nomination will face an uphill battle against Senator Chambliss in November. The poll conducted just last week shows none of the Democrats has a clear lead over Chambliss, but Jim Martin made the strongest showing. Martin got 39% to 52% for Chambliss. Of those polled, 33% would vote for Dale Cardwell against Chambliss with 53%. 31% of those polled said they would vote for Rand Knight with 55% for the incumbent. Josh Lanier also got 31% against 54% for Senator Chambliss, and Vernon Jones got 30% against Chambliss with 57%. Dale Cardwell is a former television reporter. He's making his first run for public office. Vernon Jones is a former state representative from DeKalb County and has served as the county CEO for 8 years. Rand Knight is another first-time candidate, an Atlanta native with a PhD in ecosystems analysis. Josh Lanier spent 3 decades working in Washington, D.C. as a congressional staffer and nonprofit executive. And Jim Martin served 18 years in the Georgia House, as well as head of the Georgia Department of Human Resources. Joining me this evening on our panel are 2 veteran Fox 5 reporters, political reporter Paul Yates and City Hall reporter Morse Diggs. We have 3 rounds of questions for this debate. The candidates will have 1 minute to respond and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. We are streaming our debate live on myfoxatlanta.com, where you can also participate in a live chat. And do send us your questions for the candidates, which we will include later in the hour. We want to begin with a question for round 1 from Paul Yates to Rand Knight. Paul?
Thanks, Amanda. Mr. Knight, welcome to you and the other candidates. Thank you. Given the array of problems this country is facing, what do you believe is the single most important thing the next Congress should do to assure the security of America?
We've got to tackle the energy challenge. We have got to take care of getting off the foreign oil and choke off the financial support that we're giving to the terrorists who are killing our men and women in the Mideast. If we can start investing in clean, renewable energy here in Georgia, we can actually create an enormous number of jobs that will begin building a tax base with which we can rebuild our infrastructure and simultaneously create diesel and gasoline for less than $1 a gallon right here locally in Georgia. I firmly believe that we must tackle this energy issue because it's beyond just the price at the tank. We're talking about the price of medicines and makeup and plastics. Everything we touch somehow or another involves the cost of energy. So I believe if we take a sincere effort to tackling the energy challenge here, we will reward ourselves with long-term national security and economic security here in Georgia.
Mr. Knight, thank you very much. Our next question, Morse Diggs, for Jim Martin.
Mr. Martin, Delta and most of the other airlines are struggling just to stay open, due in large part to the rising fuel costs. Will there come a time when taxpayers will have to bail out Delta and the other airlines, and would you favor that?
I think that we've already done that in the past when Delta, right after 9/11, was faced with some very serious challenges. And every time you'd have to look at the facts of the circumstance to see what's necessary to protect a Georgia business. I believe it's important for the United States Senator from Georgia to work closely with Delta and other large employers in Georgia to make sure that the federal government is responsive to the needs of that company. But you need to remember, middle-class Americans are also struggling, and there needs to be somebody in Washington that's willing to stand up for middle-class Americans, not just the large corporate entities, but middle-class Americans who are also struggling to pay their bills and to deal with their financial crisis they're facing. We've got to do something about the cost of gasoline for middle-class Americans. We need to do something about the lost home equity that's occurring as a result of the foreclosure crisis we have in this country. So sure, a senator needs to worry about Delta, but we also need to worry about all middle-class citizens in this state.
Thank you very much. Our next question from Paul Yates to Vernon Jones.
Mr. Jones, there's been criticism of housing legislation that would refinance billions of dollars in troubled mortgages. Are taxpayers in danger of going on the hook here for speculators and reckless lenders?
Well, let me say this. Obviously, there's a challenge with home ownership right now. There are over 8,000 homes per day being foreclosed on. And it's ironic that the federal government bailed out Bear and Stearns on Wall Street, but there are American families losing their homes each and every day. My job as Chief Executive Officer of DeKalb County is to provide the type of leadership, and I've done so in the housing market by providing seminars and workshops to educate people on home foreclosure, how it happens to them, how they can preserve their homes and protect their homes. But more importantly, they need someone in Washington that's going to speak up for them. When you look at when a home is lost, that's the grassroots of that family's foundation. That's where, you know, they send a child to school, they work in that community. That home is the anchor. And we have to do more to protect home ownership. And I would lead the way, working with Congress and working with those others that can help save homes, but at the same time provide an environment where others can continue to buy homes.
All right, thank you for your response. Our next question, Morse Diggs for Josh Lanier.
Mr. Lanier, other regions in the country are far ahead of Georgia when it comes to mass transit. With these fuel costs right now, is it time for a fresh look at mass transit? And would you use your influence on communities who perhaps have had a bias in the past against a service like MARTA to say, look, it's time to look at mass transit?
Indeed it is. And we also got to be very aware here in Georgia, because in Washington we talk about mass transit as if every town and every city is a large metropolitan area. There are people in Georgia out in the rural areas who are feeling the brunt. They're on the front lines of the energy problem right now and the cost of gasoline. They don't have transportation down, mass transportation in Statesboro and down in Moultrie and in Blackshear and Waycross. So if you're a farmer and you're out producing, you've still got to drive the same amount of miles. So yeah, we've got to do that. There's a lot the federal government can do in that regard, not only there but in water. And if we take a look at that later, there are some very specific issues that we can do, and I'm frankly surprised they've not already been done, that can bring federal support for that, for established programs that exist today that could be applied in Georgia to the benefit of all Georgians.
Mr. Lanier, thank you very much. Our next question from Paul Yates for Dale Cardwell.
Dale Cardwell, the soaring prices of oil certainly present a complex problem. No quick-term fix. But wouldn't some quick relief be provided if the federal gasoline tax were to be suspended at least during the summer travel season? 18 cents a gallon at issue.
No, Paul, and the reason for that, it's like feeding your children candy instead of feeding them roast beef. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to everyone because this discussion this afternoon is going to be very highbrow and we're going to be talking about very specific issues. But the fact is, I spent 23 years as an investigative reporter going behind the lines of power and government to tell you the truth and the real story. What you need to learn and understand is that you no longer control your government. Your government has been bought out from under you by giant multinational corporations who pay for the campaigns of most elected officials, and then they tell those elected officials exactly how they can and can't vote when they get to Washington. What we absolutely must do is have a Manhattan Project to remove ourselves from this dependence on foreign oil and start with renewable energies like wind and solar and biomass. That's what I will be working for you as your U.S. Senator.
All right, Mr. Cardwell, thank you. Our next question is from Morse Diggs for Rand Knight.
Mr. Knight, there are communities in Georgia right now who are so strapped for cash, I'm talking about the governments, that they are either doing or thinking about doing the unthinkable, and that is cutting public safety in order to try to balance their budget, cutting firefighters, cutting police officers. Do you think from the U.S. government that federal taxpayers play a role in bringing some help to those Georgia communities to keep police officers and firefighters?
Absolutely. I mean, if we are willing to sacrifice our own people and put our people at risk while we give tax breaks and subsidies to the wealthiest corporations in this world, while we spend billions a day over in the Mideast, but we're not able to take care of our own children, our own people on the ground, then something's wrong. We've got to take a look at the opportunity right here in this country in order to invest in our own communities and rebuild our infrastructure. We're talking about good jobs, jobs that will help clean up the environment, that will help provide for energy independence, and will help provide a revenue base to take care of our police officers and firefighters. We've got to remember that we can't just invest in the wealthiest 1% of the country without taking a look at where the people on the ground, what they're doing when they're working every day, and the safety of our people connects to the health of our communities. And if we can't keep our people safe, we can't remain happy. So we've got to focus on local communities immediately.
We thank you for your response. Our next question, Paul Yates for Mr. Jim Martin.
Mr. Martin, what are the essential elements in your view in providing wider access to health care insurance, and how do you pay for it?
That's a very good question. There are lots of different approaches to universal health care in this country. The next Congress is going to have to deal with that problem and deal with it in a meaningful way. There are different ways of doing that. I would believe that certainly we need to make sure that all children in this country have access to health care. That's a distinct difference between the Democratic candidates on this platform and Saxby-Chambliss. We all believe that the Peach Care program and programs like that allow parents to be able to have health insurance for their children is essential to deal with the health care problem. What that does is if we cover all children, we make sure that there's not an uncompensated cost of care that's spread over all people who have private health insurance. So that would help rein in some of those costs. We need to also at the federal level be willing to negotiate with drug companies about the price of drugs that we provide to senior citizens under Medicare. That has been specifically prohibited by the United States Congress with Saxby-Chambliss' support. That needs to change. That's cost the taxpayers over $10 billion every year. So we've got to be smart about how we purchase health care services, and we make sure that there's access for all children.
Thank you. Our next question, Morse Diggs for Vernon Jones.
This is something that you know about, and that is when a mandate comes down from the federal government on a government community, a local community, and the federal government says you have to do that. That's what Mayor Shirley Franklin in Atlanta faced with the sewer question. It's often been talked about being a two Georgians. There's Atlanta and everybody else. Maybe a bias toward doing too much for Atlanta. But given that she's facing a $4 billion bill, she's really gotten no help from the federal government. Do you think the federal government should play a role and taxpayers should help Atlanta and the sewers?
Well, first of all, as the chief executive of DeKalb County, I've had to manage an infrastructure, manage a budget, balance a budget, and keep taxes low. Obviously, fiscal responsibility is important. I've demonstrated the ability not only to use wisely local taxpayers' dollars to invest in infrastructure, but at the same time work with Congress and the federal government to bring down additional resources that can do matching funds. For example, in our road and transportation, I lobbied Washington very hard with others to get those matching dollars so we can build more roads and sidewalks and improve our infrastructure. But clearly, Mars, it's important to have fiscal responsibility, to allocate your resources appropriately, keep taxes low, have a thriving infrastructure. I've done it, have a track record of it. And in DeKalb County, we've never had those types of tax increases. There's never been a shortfall in our budget. We've been able to improve our infrastructure, build roads, build bridges, expand our water and sewer infrastructure, and that's the quality of life. But that's what I take to Washington. I know how to work with those local governments. I've been a mayor. I've been a county commissioner. And it's important to have someone have that type of relationship with local governments.
Paul Yates, your question for Josh Lanier.
Mr. Lanier, we're all seeing it. This prolonged drought is only worsening. This tri-state water war is complicated and it remains unresolved. As a U.S. Senator, what would you do to break the impasse?
I'd work with the governors of those states, and I'd support my own state in its negotiations. But let me also point out that the federal government has a program that deals with western states that face similar droughts, and that's under Title 16 in the Bureau of Reclamation. One thing that should already have been done by Senator Chambliss and perhaps Isaacson is add 5 words to that. Now, those 5 words are, and the state of Georgia. And we would be participating in that program right now, to where we're working on water recycling programs, just as they are in Arizona, Nevada, and California. This is, for someone, I got to tell you, I've worked in the water industry for the last 10 years, and the water industry for at least 20 has been waving the red flag to a very silent audience out there that we're looking at water shortages, not only in Georgia, but in different spots around the country, as we see in the globe. So this is an extremely serious issue. I mean, we can get by without oil, but we're not going to live very long without water. That situation, there are programs in place for it. Georgia's going to have to be part of them. Frankly, I'm surprised we have not already done so.
Mr. Lanier, thank you very much. Morse Diggs, a question, please, for Dale Cardwell.
Mr. Cardwell, early on in your campaign, you climbed a tower to try to bring some attention to your brand new rookie campaign. How did that go over? Candidly, tell me, how did that go over? And did that PR gimmick, is that consistent with seeking an office that has the stature of being a U.S. Senator?
Thank you, Morris. Actually, it is consistent. It's not consistent with what we see in Washington today. What you see is Saxby Chambliss and other senators wearing $5,000 suits and going to lobbyist lunches for $500, and then they call themselves senator, and they are proud of their high ivory tower positions, but they don't get down with the people. I decided that I needed to go up on the tower because I was frankly sick and tired of watching Channel 5 and Channel 2 and the other stations do Britney Spears updates every newscast. And they weren't talking about the real issues that you needed to know about. The $9 trillion deficit that we're facing. The fact that 47 million Americans do not have health care. The fact that we already have universal health care because people go to the emergency room and then we're paying for chronic care instead of preventative care. I felt strongly that I had to go up and I needed to connect with you, and I needed to say, I will work only for you and not for the pundits that may not like the way things are done.
Dale Cardwell, thank you very much. I'd like to end this round with a question from a Fox 5 viewer. Shannon in Cobb County has a question about education for Rand Knight. Let's listen.
Georgia is consistently perceived as being in the lower tier for education levels, whether it's graduation or higher education, and I would like to know what policies would you enact to raise those standards or raise those perceptions?
Mr. Knight, please respond.
Thank you for the question, because we trust our teachers every day to take care of our students and to teach them and educate them every day. And more than 40,000 teachers in Georgia are standing shoulder and shoulder with me. I've gotten the GAE endorsement here in Georgia. What I'd like to say, the reason they stood out for me is because we have a plan to start taking care of education here in Georgia that does not look at test scores only. It looks at how to train students how to think critically, how to think effectively, how to think on the fly. We've got to start giving our schools the technology and resources they need to start educating in the 21st century. We've got to start raising teachers' salaries. We've got to start building more schools and colleges and less prisons and jails. We're just not looking out for our students, and we're not taking care of the long-term vision of what built American competitiveness. So we've got to begin investing in the priorities of the future, and that is our children. And we've got to understand that our teachers know how to teach, and we can't evaluate them based on a test score.
All right, Mr. Knight, your time is up. Thank you. Now we're moving on to round two. In this round, each candidate will ask a question to two of their candidates of their choice. Again, you'll have 1 minute to respond and 30 seconds for rebuttal. We want to begin this round with a question from Dale Cardwell.
Thank you, Amanda. My question as we sit here today is based on the fact that most of us agree on most of the major issues. So I'm going to direct my question to Josh Lanier. Josh, I got in the race June 3rd of 2007, and I learned very quickly that if you did not do things the way that the insiders thought you should, in other words, sit in a room and dial for dollars and beg rich people for money, that it would become very difficult to raise enough money to buy the commercials that we see on the television from some of the candidates that are taking PAC money. How do we convince the media to tell the public the truth about who's paying for campaigns and then the control they have on those candidates once they're elected?
Great question, Dale. I think you asked me that once at a prior debate, and I'm not sure I had a great answer for you then. Let me see if I can do a little better now. I think and it's not so much convincing the media, in my opinion. I think I'm reminded of something that happened when I was a very young man. I was working for Senator Talmadge back during the Watergate days in the Senate. I'll never forget him commenting to the staff that it may not be in his lifetime, but one day, sooner or later, the people are just going to simply say, I've had enough, throw the bums out. And I'm telling you, all over the country, and I'm hearing it here in Georgia, I'm hearing that resonate. And so I think that day is fast approaching. I think, and I'm certain of it, it has a lot to do with money. I agree with you on that. And I think as that starts to come to bear in this primary and also in the fall elections, we're going to see a lot more attention to that subject.
Mr. Lanier, thank you for your response, and we're going to stay with you and ask you to pose a question to one of your fellow candidates.
Let me pose this question to Vernon, since we've just started to get to know each other. Vernon, you've said that you voted for George Bush in 2000 and again in 2004. I just want to ask you, in 2004, what was it you liked most about him? The $1 trillion tax cut for the wealthiest Americans, or the $400 million a day in Iraq?
Well, that's a simple answer. First and foremost, 9/11 had just happened. Terrorism was out. We needed to fight them no matter where they are. Most people felt like we should keep George Bush as president because we're in the middle of a war. And so that was important, fighting terrorism, national security, and maintaining that consistency.
All right, Mr. Jones, thank you very much. Our next question will come from Jim Martin to the candidate of your choice.
This question goes to Dale Cardwell. Dale, we all know that the issue here is beating Saxby-Chambliss, and we're fighting a good, strong Democratic primary as it should be. Some things have been said that probably shouldn't have been said, but we've been raising issues that are important to the taxpayers and to the people of Georgia. How do we get back together as a party once this primary is over so we can successfully take on Saxby-Chambliss and send him back to Moultrie?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Jim. And my answer is that you have to support fellow Democrats, and you have to support people who have the working people of Georgia at heart. What I've said from the beginning is that we have a problem in our country. It's called the Political Action Committee. They contribute far more money to campaigns than average Americans. Average Americans contribute 1/3 of 1% of all the money that goes to federal elections. 71% of the money that goes to federal elections comes from corporate funds, corporate-funded PACs. And Jim, what I've told people like you and I've told the others that are taking PAC money is that people want you to work for them. They don't want you to work for the special interests. And I've encouraged you to give your PAC money back. But if you happen to come out of this, I'll be behind you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Vernon Jones, it's your turn.
Thank you. You know, Josh and I are getting to know each other. And Josh, I want to ask you, what is your experience in balancing a budget? What is your experience in preservation of green space? And what is your experience on water conservation?
Let's see if I can follow it in order, Vernon. In terms of balancing a budget, I was one of the founders of a company that built out into 40 markets worldwide and developing environmental technology companies. I've also been the CEO of 3 national associations. I'm beginning to forget the rest of the question, but in terms of green space and things of that nature, I've worked in the environmental community in Washington, in addition to my time as a staff member in both the United States Senate and House of Representatives over a 35-year period. So in terms of those specific issues, those are the things that I've done, and I would point this out to you as a legislator, and particularly in the United States Senate, you're looking more at and if you're there, I want you to keep this in mind. It's not an executive position. It does keep an eye on the executive, but I got to tell you, it's the Congress that is out of control on spending, and we've got to rein that in. It's not the Congress that's going to balance that budget, I don't think. It may take more. It may take more action than what Congress can do to get that done.
All right, Mr. Knight, it's your turn to ask a candidate of your choice a question.
Sure. I'll ask Jim Martin. It's widely accepted that climate change and global warming will have an impact on our economy and our society and our very way of life, in fact. What's not often spoken about is the threats to national security that global warming and climate change pose. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those threats are and how you plan on affecting them in the U.S. Senate?
Well, I think that that really the issue of climate change is a critical issue. Because it might well be that climate change will be an issue that we'll have to deal with before it's a matter of supply of coal and oil. That the atmosphere may not be able to assume all the carbon emissions that we're now producing. It's a shame that the Senate was unable to vote for a cap-and-trade system for carbon emissions this session. The Republicans blocked that, as you know, in the United States Senate. I wouldn't have done that. I would have voted for us to go ahead with the debate, talk about how we go about getting control over the greenhouse gas emissions in this, not only in the United States, but in the world. We need to look at the United States as a leader on this issue. Because if we're a leader, if we use our technology and our industrial capacity and our leadership for innovation, we can solve this problem not only for this country, but for the world. And it's a great opportunity for new economic development in this country.
All right, thank you very much for your questions to one another and your responses. Everyone is getting along so well. Let's take another question from one of our viewers. This one is from John in Kennesaw, and this question is for Mr. Cardwell.
If the movement in the country is to find ways to drill now, drill here, and save money, what would your reasons be for voting against such a movement?
The most patriotic thing we could have done as of September 12th, 2001 was for our president to go on television and announce that he was going to begin a Patriots move for conservation. If he would have done that, and if he would have said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to lead the way for us to be energy dependent on sources of foreign oil within 15 years, and I'm going to ask you to do what our mothers and fathers did in World War II, and I'm going to ask you to conserve. Ladies and gentlemen, if we would have started that when we should have, we would not be in this mess today. The oil companies own 68 million acres of leases on and offshore of the United States. They're not drilling there today because there's no economic incentive for them to drill there today. They're making tons of money off of selling the oil that's being drilled in Saudi Arabia, everywhere else. Folks, we have to conserve, and we have to take that $18 billion that we're giving to the oil companies, and we've got to start investing that in clean energy entrepreneurs, and we must rid ourselves from this dependence on foreign oil.
Mr. Cardwell, thank you very much. We're doing so well on our time, and you came up with such excellent questions. We're going to give you another opportunity to ask a question of the candidate of your choice. We'll start at this end with you, Mr. Martin.
This question is for Vernon Jones. Vernon, we've worked together on senior citizens issues when I was Commissioner of Human Resources and you were CEO of DeKalb County. What is your thoughts about issues affecting senior citizens at the national level, and what will you do as a United States Senator in that regard?
Obviously, I have a track record, Jim, as you mentioned, working with seniors, not only building facilities for them so they can have opportunities to learn crafts, surf the internet, get educational, Medicaid and Medicare information. But as a United States Senator and working with seniors, I would be at the forefront of making sure that they're not going to have to choose between buying food and buying prescription medicine. Obviously, what they have to pay for medicine, obviously, the reimbursement rate from the federal government is certainly out of sync. And our seniors work so hard all their lives, and nobody's been there for them. I am an advocate for seniors, always been an advocate for seniors, have a track record, and Jim, you just touched upon my track record of not only providing resources for our seniors, but making sure that they are not choosing between drugs and food, that they are taken care of in their golden years. And I fight hard as a Dickens for our seniors.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Mr. Lanier, your question.
I'll address this to Jim. Jim, you've mentioned several times in prior debates that despite the PAC and the fundraising, that you would stand up to special interest.
Sure.
As a former staff member of the Senate, let me point out that there are 99 other senators. And as long as that system is in place, whether you stand up or not, how do you get any action? If we don't change the system, how do you get anything done? What does it mean to stand up to special interest?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because that's been my entire political career. I think some of the people on the panel know that. I have stood up when it wasn't easy, when I was one of 180 members in the House, and over time it made a difference. I was able to change people's opinions, raise the issue, move forward. You know, the truth is somebody needs to be in Washington that's going to stand up and say enough is enough. Who is representing the middle class? And that's what I have done my entire political career. Sometimes there'll be some other people on the other side. Some of the special interests will surely hire lobbyists to come in and argue the other side. But somebody's got to stand up and say it's wrong that the middle class in this country is suffering as it is, and nobody in Washington is looking out for their interests.
Do you think that person should lead by example so that he's got credibility on the floor?
Sure, and I have done that. I have done that time and time again. In my campaign, I have over 2,670 contributors. Half of them are less than $100 or less than $200. So that's the way we have gone about reaching out across this state to touch all Georgians, to put together the campaign that will take the message to Washington and can beat Saxby-Chambliss.
Mr. Lanier, do you know something different that perhaps Mr. Martin isn't touching on that you wanted to make a point of?
Absolutely. As long as we keep money in the political system, and it's not just me. Talk to any member of Congress, particularly those that are former. Our system is broken. What Dale talked about, I'll talk about, is the influence of money from the time you start to launch an election, and particularly if you get into this perpetual campaign mode that we're in now. I mean, think about that. Senators right now spend 30% of their time raising money. In an election year, that jumps to 70. That's your tax dollars at work, and we wonder why we're not getting much done. If we don't get the money out of politics, we're not going to make progress on issues, no matter how well-intentioned people are to standing up to special interests. They're controlling the agenda. Their lobbyists write the legislation. Members of Congress and senators are raising money almost perpetually now. That has to come to an end, or whatever we're saying here today about what we're going to do or the policies we're interested in is totally meaningless. We have to change the system, not just the players.
Right, and as you mentioned, and individually, that's a tough thing to do because you are only one of a group of 100.
That's why you have to lead by
respond to
example.
that. Do I get to respond to that briefly?
You may, briefly.
We're running against Saxby Chambliss. I don't know if anybody has looked about how much money he has in the bank. The way to change the policies in Washington is to get rid of Saxby Chambliss and the Republicans who've been controlling the federal government. And I'm bound and determined to do everything I can to be able to beat Saxby Chambliss. That's what I'm committed to doing.
But if the way you do that is by being Saxby Chambliss and trying to outraise Saxby Chambliss and place by Saxby Chambliss's rules, then all you're doing is perpetuating the system.
Gentlemen, thank you. We want to allow some of the other candidates to get in here and participate in the debate. Rand Knight, your question, please.
Sure. My question to Vernon. You've got legislative experience managing a county. However, a lot of the problems we're facing now require vision at a strategic national level, including water quality issues and environmental issues like energy, and in fact, how these issues relate to wars and national security. Can you talk about how your experience in legislature can help understand working families and the pain that children are experiencing on the ground who don't have health care and the education they need, and address these energy issues?
Absolutely. Again, because I have the experience working in Georgia General Assembly. As a matter of fact, Jim Martin and I both were part of the team that actually created the Children's Health Care, the Peach Care Act, where we went out and we saw there were children that had no health care from birth to 17, so we were able to give them health insurance, which is so important. I saw children across Georgia who was afraid to smile because of their teeth out of disarray, and they couldn't get dental care, pre-dental care. And so I have a record of helping young children get insurance. And I would not have voted against the S-CHIP program in Washington like Senator Chambliss did, where there was $34 billion allocated to insure 4 million more children. But in addition to that, the environment. Out in DeKalb County right now, we're capturing the methane gas from our landfill. We partner with Georgia Power. We're returning that into renewable electricity. I have a track record of doing it. I've done it. I've invested in our water and sewer infrastructure, expanded that infrastructure. At the same time, we've come up with a map now, a roadmap that allow us to do reusable water or to handle reusable water.
Mr. Jones, your time is up. But it is your turn to ask a question.
My question is not a question. My question is a comment. Again, I wanted to kind of finish that. I have a track record, again, of renewable energy. At the same time, I mentioned to you the roadmap that we're putting in place, where we're actually looking at how can we take that water that's already been used and recycle that water, which we think is important for conservation. We also in DeKalb County worked with the local governments and the people of DeKalb County to come up with an idea to give rebates for those who are changing out their toilets, reducing the gallon that it takes to flush to a lower level, and at the same time to install low flow water fixtures. So there's a track record here of working to conserve and to have a better environment.
Thank you very much. Dale Cardwell, your question, please.
You know, Amanda, I think Americans and Georgians are not wanting incremental alteration. They want fundamental change.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to excuse. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
And this is for Mr. Martin. Jim, back in 2003, a couple of your top lieutenants called me, and they were very worried. They worked for you under the Department of Human Resources when you were the commissioner. And they said, Dale, we have a computer program that's broken down. It's called the Success Program, ironically. And what it does is it allows poor people to sign up for Medicaid and for Peach Care and for food stamps. And Mr. Martin's not fixing this computer. He's allowing it to remain broken down. So people come to the DFACS office and they sit in our lobby for hours and hours. Sometimes they have to come back day after day and we tell them, fill out this paper form. But the fact is we can't enter you into the computer. And what those lieutenants told me is that this was a backdoor plan.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cardwell, can we get to your question?
Yeah. They told me it was a backdoor way to help Sonny Perdue cut the budget without having to suffer the political consequences. What do you say about that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I really am. You know what? Because you did an investigative story about that, I made my people meet with you and explain what the problem was and that it was fixed. But you never put that back on TV, Dale. And I don't understand why that is, how you could be an investigative reporter and do that. The problem was a technical problem with the Georgia Technology Authority. They were batching documents that went through this enormous computer system. It was slowing the system down. We recognized it and solved it. And I had my manager meet with you to talk to you about that. But we never saw that on TV, Dale.
Would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. In fact, you'll be able to see those stories because a gentleman recorded them at the time, and you will see the response. And you'll see that your DHS person went on camera and said, yes, our clients are suffering. And you didn't sit down and meet with me. What you did is you avoided me until I had to find you at a public event. And secondly, also, I think people need to know that you say that you're going to work for working people and poor people, but you ran from me. You wouldn't answer those questions. And people will be able to go to DaleTheTruth.com and see those documents and prove what I just said here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cardwell. Your time is up.
To that?
Yes, quickly, Mr. Martin.
We were opening the new DeKalb County Children's Shelter. Nobody had told me about this question. You came to me. I said, let me get my people to meet with you. They did, and you never put it on TV, Dale.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. And now we want to move on to round 3 with questions from our reporters and you, our Fox 5 viewers. We want to begin with a question first from Morse Stiggs to the candidate of your choice.
Mr. Lanier, the U.S. government has a term when they're going after somebody. It's called actionable intelligence. If we were to locate Osama bin Laden, whether that be in Pakistan or anywhere else in the world, should we go get him permission or no permission from that government?
Yes, and we have to be very cautious with our allies, and particularly those that may be our adversaries. But actionable intelligence with a group, and particularly an individual who may control or inspire a group to commit harm to American citizens and American cities here, I think that I can tell you that our government is quite capable of taking care of that if we have good actionable intelligence. I don't think that's something we discuss, and I don't think that's something we broadcast. I think that's something we do. And if we have such actionable intelligence, I'm certain it will be done.
Why do you think it's taken so long to find him?
Well, have you looked at the region? I've been, I've been near that region, and you know, part of that is a good question. I think we missed one heck of an opportunity at the end of the Afghanistan conflict at Bora Bora, where we knew we had him nearby. I've talked with a number of Rangers and special operations young people that I've talked to over the last 6 months to a year that have been there. We've been very close, is about all I can say. And I think that day will come. I think that day will come sooner than later.
Paul Yates, your question.
Question for Ann Knight, sir. Is there a necessity for a timetable on withdrawal of troops from Iraq? And wouldn't that only encourage enemies of the U.S.?
I believe we need to get out of Iraq as quickly as possible. This war is bankrupting our country. It's making it financially impossible for us to invest in our own people. We are building roads and schools and hospitals for the countries halfway around the world that are teaching their kids to hate Americans while we ignore our own people who are in despair on the streets. We have a massive opportunity to invest in renewable energy and jobs here in this country to do with mass transit and making our homes and offices more water efficient and energy efficient. But instead, we're dumping money halfway around the world into a country because they have oil. If there was not one drop of oil in Iraq, I doubt we would have been there this long. In fact, if it was just human rights we were worried about, we would be helping the people of Darfur and other countries around the world. I believe we need to begin withdrawal immediately, and within the next 12 to 18 months have other countries and the United Nations Security Force step in to help us out and help us figure out a long-term democratic solution to this problem. Because right now our leaders have no exit strategy, and we are ignoring the pain of our own people.
Mr. Knight, I'm sorry, you're out of time.
May I follow up to that for just
Yes.
a second? Because you raise a question that comes up frequently, particularly from the other side of the aisle, and the bugaboo of whether we're signaling to opponents, enemies, or terrorists what the United States is going to do. The United States military knows very well how to do a drawdown. Should we begin? Yes, we should. Should it be responsible? Absolutely. Should we be announcing what phases we're going to do that? Absolutely not. We've done that. I've been a soldier in Vietnam during the drawdown period. It was done to where actually I was told 48 hours before leaving that bye-bye time for you, and that was 2 months ahead of time. We don't need to be telegraphing, but we need to be executing.
Mr. Lanier,
and
your
that will
time is
take care
up.
of the problem you're addressing.
Thank you. Now I'd like to pose a question from one of our viewers. This is for Mr. Jim Martin. Dale Cardwell and Josh Lanier are not accepting PAC money. Can you remain unbiased on issues that oppose the opinions of the groups that financially support your campaign? Mr. Martin?
That's a fair question. I play by the rules that all candidates play by. And certainly the rules that Saxby Chambliss is playing by, and we'll have to take him on in November. I have less than 3% of the money that I have collected from all over Georgia comes from PACs. Will I not allow myself to raise enough money to be able to take on Saxby-Chambliss aggressively in November? No, because it's too important to change the policies of the Bush administration and to defeat Saxby-Chambliss, who's been a rubber stamp for those policies.
All right. Yes, Mr. Lanier?
We have been saying that since Teddy Roosevelt suggested public financing 101 years ago, that if we could just assemble the money for this next election, then after that we'll look at some serious reform. We've got to do this sooner or later. And it's not just candidates talking about it in this election. It's former members, sitting members. We can't keep saying, I've got to match his money. I've got to play the game because we'll change it when I get elected. We have lied about that and been unable to do it since 1907. Those are the facts. It's time to stand up and get it done.
And you think
now.
you can win without, with small contributions only?
Absolutely you can. Absolutely you can.
Dale?
Be the opposite of what we're complaining about, and you'll see a change.
Amanda, I appreciate the caller's question, because what Jim didn't tell people is that if you take a look at his first disclosure, he raised about $300,000 that he can spend in the primary. Almost half of that money came from one interest group, attorneys. Now, attorneys are good people, but my question to the people of Georgia is, do you want attorneys to decide who's going to be our senator? I think doctors, I think teachers, I think laborers, I think farmers ought to decide who our nominee should be, not just attorneys.
Thank you very much.
Can I respond to that?
Briefly, and then we want to move
My
on.
disclosure statement will be filed shortly. All of us will file disclosure statements, and you'll see how broad my support is across this state.
All right, thank you very much. More Stiggs, your next question.
Flag pins became an issue in the presidential primary. I think I see 1, 2 flag pins. You're wearing them. For the 3 who are not wearing flag pins, it's starting with you, Dale. For some of our viewers, that may matter. Does the fact that you're not wearing one, I don't know if you ever wear one, but the fact you're not wearing one, does that reflect any level of pride you have in the country?
You know, Morris, what I've done to prove people my patriotism and my commitment to them is that I have worked very, very hard to tell you the truth. I mean, my heart is my integrity, and my integrity is my character. I've been on a hit list. A sheriff wanted me dead because I was telling people the truth about his corruption, so he put me on a hit list. When the Fulton County courthouse shooting tragedy happened, I was the reporter that the deputies there trusted to show copies of Brian Nichols' notes that could have been found in his jail cell the day before, which indicated his escape plans. They trusted me to tell you about that. For 23 years, people have trusted me to tell them the truth, and a flag pin is not the thing that helps me to tell you the truth. I'm an American, I'm proud of it, and I know you know that.
How about Mr. Knight? I see you're not wearing a flag pin.
No, I'm wearing a pin of the state of Georgia because I believe, true patriotism means taking care of our people. Anyone who thinks that wearing a flag pin means you're a patriot should take a look at what Saxby's been voting on. Saxby voted against more protection and more armor for our troops while giving it to the Iraqi government. If you want real national security, we need to start protecting our own country's borders and looking at our own ports. We need to start looking at opportunities to make sure our families have food on the table and make sure that they have jobs and make sure they have health care. The real national security issues are right here at home. So if we want to talk about patriotism, let's look at our people locally, like right here in Georgia.
And Mr. Lanier, does the U.S. flag pin matter, wearing one?
No, we abuse the use of the American flag. This is a pin from one of my medals from Vietnam. I'm happy to discuss with anyone, including Saxby-Chambliss, particularly about that conflict and service in it. But also, in general, let me tell you, we, particularly on the other side, I got a questionnaire recently, and maybe the other members did as well, from the American Legion. I'm a veteran. From the American Legion, I got a questionnaire, front and back, 10 questions, I believe. All 10 questions were about a constitutional amendment involving burning the flag. Not one question about a veteran.
I'm sorry,
So
Mr.
I'm happy
Lanier,
to
your
anyone
time
who
is
wants to
out.
bring up
Over.
lapel pins.
Would you like to comment?
I'm wearing a pin, certainly with the American flag, but the Georgia state seal on it. I served in the Georgia General Assembly. I want to represent Georgia and Washington. I want to help people who are losing their jobs and losing their homes. Those are important things, Morris. Our men and women who are serving in Iraq, coming home, 30,000 already injured. 4,500 lost their lives. And so as a United States Senator, certainly I'm indebted to Georgia and to work hard for Georgians, but also to represent America. America's reputation across the country now is not what, across the world I should say, is not what it used to be. We're not the leader like we were before. I want to get America back on track.
Mr. Jones, I'm sorry you're out of time. And
Okay.
Mr. Martin, to be fair, please your comment quickly.
Sure. This flag pin was given to me by former Speaker Pro Tem Jack Cannell, who was a Second World War veteran. And he said to me, Jim, if you're going to run for office, you need to wear the American flag. And I've done that ever since, mainly because I respect him so much and the sacrifice that people gave to us, this country, in the Second World War. A pin is just a pin. The flag is a symbol of something important, America and our democracy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Our next question, Paul Yates.
What about military service, Mr. Knight? Should a candidate's military service or lack thereof matter to voters?
Well, certainly we should be proud of the contribution those who've served have done, and if they want to serve in politics, that should be recognized. However, what we need are people who have the kind of experience necessary to tackle the problems we're facing right now. We need people with a background in science, in engineering, in education, who have families on the ground, who understand the pain and despair on the street right now. If you just say that being a lawyer or being a veteran is enough to serve in public office, I think we're going to miss out on the opportunities, the economic opportunities we have in this country to start taking care of our people again. We need people with business experience who know how to take care of the environment and the economy at the same time, people who understand biology, people who understand conservation and commerce, so we can solve these problems and take care of our working men and women, start investing in our infrastructure. And honestly, I'm not sure that the experience of being a lawyer or a veteran necessarily is going to equip you to handle the kind of problems we're facing right now in this country. So I believe that science and engineering need to step up to Washington, and we need more expertise in the U.S. Senate.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Knight. We have another viewer question. This one is for Vernon Jones. Besides being physically conservative, what makes you a conservative Democrat? Mr. Jones?
Well, obviously, Senator Sam Nunn demonstrated, I believe, a fiscal conservative Democrat, and I am along those same lines. A lot of people right now are worried in some local governments because taxes are getting ready to be increased. The level of services are decreasing. As a chief executive officer, I have a standing record of balancing budgets and not raising taxes. That is so important, managing government. And it's not always the size of government, it's the efficiency in government, and I have a record of doing so. You know, when you look at fees and taxes, when you start to add them all together for working families, those who are losing their homes, they can barely afford to pay local government for their services, and then they're losing their homes at the same time because they just lost their jobs. So being fiscally conservative means maintaining the best stewardship of taxpayers' dollars. That is so important, and I have a record of doing so, keeping taxes low, delivering those essential services, and making sure that we're not wasting counties' dollars.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Mr. Jones, quite frankly, I would like to say that I don't think you've ever met a bond you didn't like. You have borrowed DeKalb into debt, and people are being fired in DeKalb County, and in fact, the homicide rate in DeKalb County is skyrocketing. And you're saying that your experience of managing this process is something successful to talk about?
Can I respond?
Yes.
Obviously, here's a case of someone who's talking the talk but never had to walk the walk. He's never balanced the budget. He's never delivered any essential services. And let me tell you what I do. Any bonds, for the most part, been issued. They have gone through public referendum. And under my watch, to build schools, to build libraries, to build bridges, sidewalks, and preserve land, which you have not preserved any land. You call yourself Mr. Environment. Those bonds were passed by the people of DeKalb County, and it was to improve the quality of life. Those bonds went to pay for resurfacing streets. They went to pay for preserving green space, over 3,000 acres of land.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jones.
So you
your
have
time
no
is up.
experience in doing that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Diggs, you have a question.
Mr. Martin, the Supreme Court recently spoke out in a very narrow decision on gun rights. Now, when it comes to law-abiding citizens, those with no felonies, would you place any restrictions with regard to the use of basic handguns?
No, not on law-abiding citizens. That's what the Second Amendment says, and that's exactly what the United States Supreme Court said. You cannot have a statute that prohibits law-abiding people from owning guns. We do need to enforce existing laws, particularly the background check laws. They need to be adequately funded so a background check can be done within a timely period of time to determine whether or not somebody who's applying for a weapon is a criminal or has a mental illness. And so I think the Supreme Court did the right thing in its decision.
Should they be able to carry them into a restaurant or a stadium?
Well, the Supreme Court said you cannot bar ownership of handguns in the city of Washington, D.C. They were right in that. It did go on to say there are reasonable regulations. I think that perhaps there are the things you mentioned, there are possibilities of making sure that people not be able to take guns into crowded areas or in public places. So I think that there are things that can be done, but the Supreme Court said very clearly that the right to own that the Second Amendment protects all Americans' right to own guns.
Thank you very much. Paul Yates.
Dale Cardwell, another question on your TV reporting career. You spent a lot of time during that period covering Vernon Jones. Do you believe your reporting was fair? What's your relationship with him now?
I like Vernon. I think he's a nice man. The truth is, Paul, I covered a lot of local politicians. I was the one that exposed the fact that Sonny Perdue was flying his family all over the state of Georgia in a helicopter and a plane that you were paying for. You were paying the gas. It got so bad that he flew his son up to Gainesville because he was running late for a high school football game.
What about the reporting on Vernon Jones? Let's address that. Do you believe it was fair?
Absolutely. It was all based on public record, documentation. In fact, I understand that there's a group of DeKalb County police officers that have created a website called VernonJonesFacts.com, and it's just purely public record on Mr. Jones. And, you know, I always, in my reporting career, relied on public records, and as you know, that's very important.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, let me tell you, Channel 5 had said some things that were false, and I appreciate you all retracting those as well. Dale is, I consider him a nice guy in general. Obviously, his factual reports have not been factual. In his mind, I think it was factual, but he mentioned public records, and it was based on public records. It's kind of interesting. He did a story that said that I was doing background checks. Wasn't based on public records, none at all. The GBI reviewed it, interviewed 180 police officers, 80 police officers over 180 people, and it came back that I didn't do anything. But Dale didn't come back and retract that story.
Sorry, Mr.
But he said it
Jones,
was
your
based
time
on
is up.
facts, but it was no fact.
And I should have an opportunity to respond.
Quickly, please.
What that report said was that Vernon's chief of security, a gentleman named Don Frank, had been caught running background checks at the East Precinct. Mr. Jones said at one time he was going to terminate anyone who was caught doing exactly that, and he never terminated Don Frank. In fact, Mr. Frank is now Deputy Chief of Police of DeKalb County.
We're obviously, I'm sorry, we're running out of time quickly, and I don't think we're going to settle this during this hour. One more question I'd like to ask quickly of all of the candidates. You know, California just approved same-sex marriages. They recognize them from anywhere. What is your position on that? Do you, or would you support in Georgia? We've got Gay Pride Week coming up next weekend. Would you support same-sex marriages in Georgia? Yes or no? Quickly, we're moving through.
No.
Yes.
Mr. Newlier.
Yes, I stand for equality for all people.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
No.
All right. And that concludes round 3 of our questions. And each candidate will now have 1 minute for a closing statement. And we want to begin those closing statements with Dale Cardwell. Dale?
Thank you, Amanda. I want to thank Fox 5 and Paul and Morris for asking such good and penetrating questions. Again, I've been your investigative reporter for 23 years, 11 years across the street at WSB-TV. I decided not to take PAC money. I was the first Democrat that entered this race back in 2007 in June. I had no idea that our nominee, Barack Obama, had taken the same pledge, because he realizes that the only way we're going to move our country forward is to actually break the stranglehold that special interests have on our country. I've asked my fellow candidates. Josh Lanier is the only one who is not taking PAC money in addition to myself. So I have a question to ask you. Do you trust me? And I'll ask again, do you trust me? Because I've been all over the state, and people tell me, Dale, all I want is one chance to vote for an honest person, a truth teller who will not be controlled by special interests, who will work for real people like me. Ladies and gentlemen, July 15th, I'm that candidate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vernon Jones.
Thank you. I just want to say to all Georgians, I've enjoyed having an opportunity to serve both in the legislature and as chief executive officer. My job has been to assist working families, to improve infrastructure, build libraries, build sidewalks, and preserve land and renewable energy. Those have been the things I've worked on. Also to help provide health care insurance for young children through the Peach Care Act. It's time for us to put America first. We're building schools and bridges and roads in Iraq. We're protecting their oil, and we're paying $3 more, I should say 3 times the amount more for a gallon of gasoline as they are over in Iraq. And then we're not investing in our infrastructure. We're spending money over there. We should redirect those resources back here at home and start to invest in America, create jobs, create opportunities for working families. People are hurting right now. The economy is rough. and I want to serve you in Washington. I have a solid record of doing so. I have the energy. I've been all over this state, and people, I share with them their vision in terms of they want a better America and to take this country in a better direction. So Georgians, give me an opportunity on July 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. Rand Knight.
Thank you. Folks, what you've been hearing a lot of today is the same old business as usual politics in this country. What we need is new, fresh leadership, people who are equipped to handle the kind of problems we're facing right now. The 250,000 members of the AFL-CIO in Georgia, the working men and women of this country have stood behind me and endorsed me. More than 40,000 teachers in Georgia have gotten behind me because I have a vision of a better America where we start investing in clean, renewable energy and mass transportation, where we start building the transit cars here, where we start retrofitting our federal and state buildings and making them water and energy efficient. If you keep on going with the same old thing, you're going to get the same results. When the Indianapolis Colts, the New York Giants went for a new quarterback, they didn't call Archie Manning. They got Peyton and Eli Manning to stand up. When we go to get soldiers to fight and win wars for our country, we don't recruit people who fought in Korea and Vietnam. We get the new young soldiers who'll go up there and fight for us. When the Lord wanted to get his people out of the wilderness after 40 years, he didn't call back Moses. He got Joshua to help us cross the Jordan. We have got to stand up and select people who are equipped to handle the kinds of problems we're facing so we can take care of our families here in Georgia and grow good jobs that will build our economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knight. Josh Lanier.
And I'll be happy to follow the Joshua analogy there, Brent. My friends, let me just shoot it to you straight. Almost 90% of Americans believe that our country is off course. Almost 80% believe that our national legislature is barely functioning, and it's a joke. 70% of Georgians believe that if we don't get money out of politics, we're not going to make a great deal of progress on the issues in front of us. And in fact, 65% of Georgians understand that we may have to go to public financing to help speed that along. If you're one of those, I want you to know something. I agree with you, and you're absolutely right. And I can say that because I spent 35 years in Washington working in the system as both a staff member in the House and in the United States Senate. I can tell you the system has got to be changed, and now's the time to do it. That's why I'm running the kind of campaign that I am. That's why I don't hold fundraisers or spend time dialing for dollars on the phone. And we need to do this by leadership and by acting and not by words. If, with your support on July 15th, we'll send the strongest possible message to the people of the United States that we need to change the system of electing people.
It's your turn.
I'm thankful to the thousands of Georgians from all over the state who have actively been involved in my campaign. Together, in a little more than 3 months, we put together the campaign that can beat Saxby-Chambliss. As United States Senator, I will continue my fight to work to protect working Americans and working Georgians, protecting us from high oil prices that are caused by excess profits by oil companies, by speculation, by futures traders, and by the failed policies of the Bush administration. Protecting our families who need health care by making sure health insurance is affordable and accessible, and protecting our country from terrorism by getting our troops out of Iraq so we can take care of our own country again. Saxby-Chambliss wants to be sent back to Washington to continue the failed policies of the Bush administration, but change is around the corner, and that change is Senator Jim Martin. I would appreciate your vote in the Democratic primary on July the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of Fox 5, thank to all of our candidates for participating in this debate this afternoon. And we thank you, our viewers, for watching. We encourage everyone to get out and vote. That's Tuesday, July 15th in Georgia's primary election. For a complete list of state and county races and voter information, you can always go to our website, myfoxatlanta.com, and click on the You Decide tab. And be sure to join Fox 5 on election night for live reports on the major races and complete results throughout the evening. We will have a live webcast beginning at 9 p.m. with special guests in our studio, including members of the Georgia Gang and other political analysts. Then join us for complete results on Fox 5 News after the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. Now, stay tuned for Fox 5 News at 6. Good night.